In this lesson, we're going to learn two ways of modeling fixed window frames. Now, the reason why I'd like to show you two is one is going to be a very quick and rough method, which I would use if I'm running out of time for a project and I really want to get a deadline done very quickly. And the second one you can use when you need more control over your model and you know that your model is going to be a longer term process and you want to come back and edit things and be able to basically have that changeability within your model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to model these two identical areas of glazing on the facade on the right and the left hand side of the entrance. Both of them are identical so that you can basically see the same window being modeled in two different ways, and then you can decide based on what your project requires you to do which one suits you better in your particular case. So let's get started quickly with the first one, and what we're going to do here is we're going to start by modeling a flat plane which is standing up vertically. So let's start by drawing a line, and we're going to draw the line from end to end of that window frame, and then I'm going to extrude that line vertically upwards, so EXT, enter in the modifier list, and I'm going to set it at 3.5 meters, which I know from looking at my elevations and sections that is the height from the floor to the ceiling. Next, what I'm going to do, and this is where you can either do it a little bit neater or the very quick way, which I'm going to show you, is you can simply go in and select your top and bottom edges and then just start to connect segments into that plane so that you end up having the correct amount of segments. Now, this is the point where you will see that these lines don't exactly line up, because here we have the outside, and once that interpolation happens over these 6 panels, you see that they aren't exactly evenly spaced. So what you can do here is that you can manually go and move everything into the right position before you go and add your segments and make it really neat and tidy. But what I'm showing you here is a much quicker, faster, rougher way, instead of going the proper due diligence way. So next thing you want to do is select all of your polys, then scroll down to insert. Within your insert, choose by polygon, and then just choose the width of the frame, or in other words half the width of the frame, since that frame distance will be times 2 since you're going in both directions. So once you have that, all you need to do now is detach that internal poly, and with that internal poly selected, you can then add a tessellate modifier so we can see where that mesh is. And lastly, let's just right click on this to zero that out. Let's add a shell modifier to that of 1 centimeter. That's already done, and that's going to be our glass. And next, onto the frame itself, we are going to add a shell modifier as well, and this one is going to be 0.15 deep. Then in our plan view, I'm just going to go into the top view here. I'm going to move my glass line back to where it shows me on plan. So there, in a very quick and crude way, in about a minute or so, I have gone and created a very quick and rough set of window frames. So what is beautiful about this is that you won't lose any time. You won't, however, have accuracy, and you also won't have too much editability once your model is created. So let me go and make that same model here on this side, this time using a slightly more complicated process. So I'm just going to isolate my plan out here. And I'm going to start pretty much the same process, except I'm going to make a few changes along the way so that I can add a little bit more complexity to it. So first I'm going to start with my straight line, just as I did before. I'm going to redo that extrusion, 3.5 meters. Next, I'm going to add an edit poly modifier. I'm going to select the border, and I'm going to scroll down and choose to create a shape, making a plain linear shape. Then I'm going to delete my poly, since it was just a placeholder to create this outer spline. And then what I want to do is I want to take one of these vertical edges and I want to just make a copy and place it onto the edge of a frame. Then go and detach that copy so that you basically have a separate object that you can then go and work with. So let's just scroll down to detach. And I know that the width of my frame is 5 centimeters, so I'm going to just manually move down my vertices here by minus 0.05, and this one will be plus 0.05. And this is now going to be one of my verticals. But I do, however, want to put this line into the center of this frame. So I'm going to move it in the positive X direction by half of the frame width. So this requires a little bit of knowledge of what exactly your frame sizes are. So I need to now add 0.025. So now you'll see that that line is exactly in the center of that frame. And let's just go for cleanliness sake, center the pivot to the center of that object. Now I'm going to make an instance of this 4 times so that I have one line for each of my frames. So you'll see there we have those 5 lines. And now I can start adding sweep modifiers to the splines themselves. You can undo your smoothing, you don't necessarily need it, and then just choose where you need your pivot to be for it to align correctly. And here we can go and add that dimension, so it's 0.05 by 15. And let me just go and swap this. So that is now the width of the frame. And that same sweep can be added here, just SW enter on the modifier list. And let's go and just set this up. So this will be 5 as well by 15. So there we have that frame. To make the glass now, instead of redrawing the object, I always like to use existing objects and modify them. So let's take this outer frame and then just type Control V on our keyboards, make a copy of that object, undo the sweep, and let's add an editable poly modify to it, and that's just going to make it a solid. Let's insert it slightly so that we don't have the glass going right out to the outside of the frame. And we can insert that by 4 centimeters so that we have a little bit of an overlap into the actual frame itself. Then I'm going to type Control I on the keyboard, delete those external outer polys, which I now created by doing the insert function. And I'm also in plan going to now move it backwards just as I have done before. And I'm going to add a shell modifier of 1 centimeter. Also, before you add the shell, it is a good idea to add a tessellate. This is just good practice that I find so that you can, as I mentioned earlier in the lesson, so that you can see your mesh. You can add as many iterations as you need. So this process of creating window frames is slightly more complex because you have more objects. You have independent objects for each of your frames. So this can become quite a busy group of objects that you then have to start dealing with. So it's a good idea now to group it, but do remember that when you group objects, if you do select the object, one of the tricks to remember here is if you do select a grouped object within your layer manager and you apply a material to it, it's going to apply that material to the whole group. So you just remember to open your groups before you apply any materials. I've gotten myself into a lot of trouble by making all of my glass objects solid metal, and that is because the objects were grouped. So the beauty about this method, the second one, the more time-consuming one that we've just done, is the fact that there is a lot of control now. In other words, if a client comes back 2 weeks later and tells me that they want their window frames at half the width, or they want really slender window frames, I can now just go in and type that parameter, and all of those window frames will now go and change according to whatever I choose it to be. So each one of those verticals is now instanced, and I also have an independent relationship to the outer frame, which I can now make thicker or wider, or I can basically change it in any way I like. I can also make the material unique without really getting into any complex sub-object materials or multi-object materials. So this is really a good solution if you do want that high level of accuracy and especially control and editability. So otherwise, there you go. That is it for this lesson. We've just learnt about fixed glazing, and this method can basically now apply to any type of high-rise that you do, any fixed windows that you do on your building. For example, we have some fixed windows on the side, and that can definitely be something that can help you depending on how much time you have. So what I'm going to do off screen for us is I'm going to model the other windows. So we basically have the same thing happening here. This I'm just going to make a mirror across to the other side. I'm going to copy it. And then we have a very high fixed glass area in this portion. And then on the front entrance we have a swinging door. So we may have a look at some of the swinging doors later when we get to the doors section of this course, but what I'm rather going to focus on in the next lesson to keep things interesting is we're going to start modeling this very large glazed facade, which is going to be one of the big features of the house because we're going to make it animatable, and we want to really see the transparency of this house, and we want to see how well we can have this feeling of openness, which is one of the main themes of this seaside villa. We want to make sure that the whole living area completely opens up and it just feels like a very free and great environment. So that's what we're going to start modeling, and we're going to try represent that openness through the model that we now are going to create in the next lesson. So definitely hang around for that and give that a watch.